Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and thanks for joining us. We got another great episode for you here, and if you are new to the program, go check out our archives because we've got some great episodes of smart CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, executives of all kinds of companies, ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, and many more. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest here today is Steve Kahan. He successfully helped grow 7 startup companies from early stage to going public or being sold, resulting in over $5 billion in shareholder value. In this episode, we're actually going to do a bit of a teardown of a recent acquisition that he went through, a company he was instrumental in helping to grow over about 7 years or so. Recently was acquired at $1.4 billion valuation. So really incredible result. We're going to talk about how he grew that business. And Steve is also the author of a number of different books, including Be a Startup Superstar, High Velocity Digital Marketing is the most recent one, and working on an interesting murder mystery thriller, which we'll have to hear more about in the future when it's out there. This episode, of course, brought to you by Rise25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn more about what we do at rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. All right, Steve, excited to have you here today. And we were talking beforehand about this, the company that you were with over about a 7-year period, grew it from $5 million in revenues to $145 million in revenues, was acquired at a $1.4 billion transaction. Let's break this down. What are, looking back in the rearview mirror, what are some of the key factors that yielded such a tremendous result?
Yeah, John, good to be with you. It was a hell of a ride. And I remember when I joined this company with the funny name called Thycotic, sounds, I know, a little bit like psychotic, that it was in the cybersecurity space. It actually secured passwords, just to provide some context, across an organization's infrastructure, their operating systems, databases, applications, and if bad people get a hold of those passwords, they have the keys to the kingdom. And so when I started on day one, we were just sort of also ran in that space. We had a good product. We were going against bigger, better funded competitors. Revenue had flatlined 2 quarters in a row when I joined, along with one other executive when a VC had put money into the company. And certainly the odds were stacked against us, and some of the high hopes that the venture capital folks had were starting to wane a bit. And we literally restored revenue growth within the very first quarter. We hit our revenue targets every quarter for 5 years, where we grew from 5 to the 145 million. We took share away from brutally tough competitors. And what we did to achieve that great success was we created a highly efficient sales and marketing machine that and really from a digital marketing perspective, we're able to grow quickly. And getting into what just one example of one of the things we did is that I remember when I started, I was interviewing the founders and the management team, and I asked them who their customers were. And they said, Steve, well, of course, this is a cybersecurity company. You should know our customers. They're the VPs of IT security. They're the CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers. We hired you. You're an experienced guy. You ought to know that. And so I shook my head and then started to meet with a number of those customers and, of course, asking them the right questions. And what I came to find out was that although the company was 5 million at the time, that the VPs of IT security weren't the customers at all. In fact, the customers were the IT admins. These were the techies in the trenches who wore many hats, one of which was security. And they were looking for fast, easy, affordable, some very specific characteristics and solutions that they worked for. They were never going to read an analyst report ever. They would read, for example, reviews from their peers, which were very important to them. And so there were very specific places that they hung out online that were very much different than those folks who were responsible for IT security. And so imagine if I had put a go-to-market strategy and a marketing strategy that was focused on the wrong customer. I can assure you that we would never have gotten the return on our investments that we had hoped for. And being able to go at that customer with the right message by understanding the full context of their world, that really set the table for us to be able to market very efficiently online and start to grow revenue very quickly.
So to kind of clarify it, it seems like what you discovered is that it wasn't the higher level C-suite executive, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, that was your buyer that was actually making the buying decision. It was the person that reported up to them that was the person that was making these decisions, doing the research about which solution to go with. Is that correct?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that when I talk with a lot of execs is that, and if you ask them and you say, gee, are you talking to your customers? I mean, even if they're not doing it enough, they probably won't say it quite like that.
They won't admit it. They'll say, oh yeah, we're talking to our customers.
Right. And so it's not just that you're continually talking to your customers, it's that you're asking them the right questions. So for example, a lot of organizations, they sort of ask questions that lead their customers to answer those questions in a way that, lo and behold, somehow align with the product that they sell. Right. And so that really
loaded questions. In other
yeah,
words.
exactly.
Yeah, sending them in that direction.
That doesn't work. And so, for example, let me give some of the listeners an example of some questions that they probably ought to be asking. So many companies do not ask questions around the status quo. And the status quo represents the customer's current situation, how they conduct business now. And this really matters because you often don't lose business to a competitor. You lose business to the status quo. It's like when you hear someone saying, yeah, I'm just not going to go buy right now. What I've got is good enough, right? And so what you've got to be able to do is to really understand that we're asking questions for what is their current process for insert their particular challenge, what works, what doesn't. How does your team stay on top of that challenge and not get overwhelmed by it? What are a few of the tools that you currently use to solve for that challenge? What do you like about them? What don't you like? Right? And simply just understanding the answers to how they are viewing the status quo and how the status quo might have certain obstacles or challenges associated with it is really the beginning of starting to understand your customers in ways in which you can market to them effectively. And when you're asking a lot of these right questions, what I often advise to do is that you pay specific language attention to the language that the customers use. And I always kept a master document populated with the phrases that they use
so
for
just
their
like
situation.
typing into it every time you talk to someone and putting those in there. Yeah.
Exactly. Because what I've found over the years is that the truth is that most buyers, they really don't care how clever your marketing department is. What they want to do is they want to work with people who understand them, who empathize with them. And speaking their language proves that you do exactly that.
So like, and it's great when it's like some kind of rich language. Like, I understand that you are kept up at night worrying about whether your cybersecurity solution is going to break and you're not going to have someone you can turn to, something like that.
Yeah, let me give you a practical example so that people really could get it and could apply it to their own businesses. So when I was talking to those IT admins who were responsible for security, I would ask them a question, which was like, how many of these passwords were known as privileged passwords? So I would say, how many privileged passwords do you have in your organization? And most of these companies have complex infrastructures, whether they're on premise or the cloud. And so when I asked that question, literally 100% of them said, we really don't know. And so, like, if you don't know how many of these passwords you have, how are you going to manage and secure them? So just by understanding that, we had a discovery feature that was in our paid for product. And what I decided to do was to rip out that discovery feature, give it away for free, target it to specific environments, and we created a free tool that then discovered those passwords. It presented them with what they had, the risks associated with it, and even told them what they would need to do should they choose to manually go take care of it, right? And so that really was something that offered huge value, content that flew off the shelves. And then I trained our sales team and our partners to properly follow up with that content so they would be able to say, like, well, gee, how did you do? Where did you do well? Where didn't you do well? Would you be interested in learning how we might help? Which then changed the whole dynamic of our relationship, because we weren't just viewed as like pushy salespeople, which of course our salespeople I'm sure were, but they were also following up in very much a consultative manner, and that further differentiated us and enabled us to create really long-lasting relationships in ways that our competitors did not.
That's really cool. Here's a possibly dumb question. So if they didn't know how many passwords they had, if they didn't know about this, or more broadly, if you're working with a market that doesn't know about the area that you want to help them with, how did you create a solution where you were able to tease out some information around it?
So that's a great question. So one of the things, if you want to have a high velocity sales and marketing model, what you need is, and what I explained, that free tool, that discovery free tool, was one of the critically important pieces of content that we had that flew off the shelves. But what you need is you need to have content across the full spectrum of the buyer's journey. That discovery free tool was really at the consideration phase, when they were looking to define their problems in a little bit more detail and really understand the magnitude of the problem. But you also need to have content at the top of the buyer's journey, right in the educational stage, right? And so this is where they're really starting to discover their problem, where maybe they can't even put the words to it to fully express it. So you've got to have educational content there. So there we would have things like, for dummies books, we would partner with the Wiley publishers. We played in a space called privilege access management for PAM for dummies, an educational piece, or the expert's guide to PAM. Or here was a great piece of content that, like, a lot of your listeners could think about how this might relate to their business, is that we had what we called the privilege access management risk assessment. And what that did was someone could come to our site, answer some questions, and as a result of that, they would get a grade like they were in university, A through F. And moreover, not only would they get this grade, but they would also start to then learn where, based on the report that they would immediately get, where they were doing well, where they weren't doing well. And because we captured information about the industry, the geography in which they were in, and the size of their company when they were filling out this info, we were able to create some incredibly great content. So for example, we could do a global report on the state of privilege access management. We could slice and dice the data to do mini reports. For example, the state of privilege access management for financial services companies in the UK. right? And all of this educational content led to that discovery tool. And it fed our social media. It fed really interesting, differentiated information that we were communicating out through traditional media based on the proprietary knowledge that we had. It populated our podcast, our webinars, and so on. And so we were able to have that connective tissue, if you will, from the educational content at the top of the funnel down to that next stage, which was the free tools that we had. And I gave you an example of one, down to the next stage, which would be more of an evaluation, like a free trial. And if you have a gap in content in any one of those phases, nothing zaps the velocity of a high velocity model than gaps. And most companies actually have those content gaps. So I would encourage listeners to really review the content they have, maybe utilize some of the ideas and think about how that might apply to their business so that they can get their business accelerating revenue growth.
And how would they discover where those gaps exist? Like, would it be interviewing non-buyers, like potential leads that didn't close, or are there other strategies you have for kind of understanding where your own gaps are?
Right. So I would look at a very simple sort of buyer's journey, right? Which would be sort of discovery and the educational consideration, evaluation, and then through to purchase. And I would map all of the pieces of content that we had against those various stages to ensure we didn't have a gap. But you bring up a really important point, which is we had great content, and I spent a lot of my time thinking about what that content ought to be that would fly off the shelves, get us more leads, more pipeline, and then ultimately more revenue. But the question that I get from most organizations is, okay, well, that's great, Steve. Like, how do we come up with ideas that would work for us? And here is what I recommend that you do. What I would do twice a year is I would convene a meeting with the best and the brightest in our company. These were people out of R&D. They could be sales engineers. They could be professional services personnel, et cetera. And I would send them links to great content that could be inside our industry, outside our industry, really didn't matter. And I asked each of them to come to a meeting with their very best idea for content that they think our buyers would covet. And we would have those meetings twice a year. We would come up with great ideas. A lot of times, because I did it with that staff, I would need help creating that content. So I had built in helpers as well as built in cheerleaders, our best and brightest, who would be helping me to promote that content when it was made available. And so I would map it against the various stages of the buyer's journey, the content that we had, but I would get several folks from inside and outside of marketing to contribute their best ideas. And we always had more ideas than we could ever implement.
I love that idea of convening a meeting with all of your experts within the company, because they have the knowledge twice a year and kind of sussing that out of them. I want to ask you about you mentioned this, the way that the team, the salespeople in particular, would follow up, and it changed the way that they were to follow up in more of a consultative model. And I think that's such a key point. So I want to dwell on it a little bit more, kind of the process for making the follow-up more relevant, because I know that's such a better approach rather than just, did you see the proposal yet? Did you see the proposal yet? Or, did you miss my email? That kind of annoying stuff. So talk a little bit about the way that you changed that follow-up model.
Yeah, so most companies would be like just scared if they actually heard how a lot of their leads are being followed up on. And really from a couple of different perspectives. One is that it's like a pushy salesperson who really doesn't understand the customer and is not asking questions, but is like, just because they want to get in everything that they have to say.
Yeah.
right? And it's like, and it just turns people off right from the get-go, right? So that's one perspective. Or following up in ways that just aren't relevant. So for example, someone downloads a piece of content and then it's almost like the salesperson following up really is starting from scratch when they should know what they have downloaded, what's in there, what's the best practices follow up. And so what I find is that most organizations are not training their customers on their content, or their salespeople and partners on their content, on the campaigns, letting them know that the campaigns that are hitting and when they're going to hit and who they're going to go after, and what are the best practices for following up. Simply by doing that, you put yourself in a much better position for an effective follow-up. And I would also say that it even goes a layer beyond that, because today, a lot of times there are multiple ways to follow up. For example, a lot of organizations have a website where they have chat on, they have websites with chat on it, right? And so we would create a lot of the content for those salespeople so that their chats aren't loaded with misspellings or the wrong types of follow-up, which again, just don't reflect your company in the best light. So it requires a little extra time to properly train, but also remember, it's not just your salespeople that are your employees, it's your partners who might be selling your products as well. Right. And if you have that regular training, you're keeping sales informed, you're requiring that they actually have absorbed the information where they're not like on their phone during training, not paying attention. Like that little extra effort will go such a long way. And then I would add one more thing. It's staying on top of things, because the competitive environment doesn't stay static, it shifts. So when we were delivering messages around simplicity, one of our bigger competitors, who was a really good company, public company, and really the 800-pound gorilla, their product was very complex. And they saw that our simple message was working. And so what I did is I started to do some research. I knew that our product documentation was about 30 pages. And I did some research and I found their product documentation, and it was like over 1,500 pages.
Wow.
So I compared their product documentation to like the fourth largest novel ever written in human history, and then trained our sales and partners to use that table of contents in their follow-up.
War and Peace. Whoa.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like War and Peace. And from that day forward, their simplicity message fell flat.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. I want to ask you about something else that you mentioned in here, because I'm picturing you going into like an executive meeting with the C-suite and saying, all right, guys, okay, we've got a great solution here. You know those For Dummies books? Yeah, we're gonna do something there. So did you come up with like a whole For Dummies book, or you mentioned briefly, I mean, you said like a partnership with them? How did that work?
Yeah. Like, so you could, Wiley Books, like Wiley Publishing, Wiley actually published my first book, but they do the For Dummies franchise, okay. Right? And they own that, right? And so you work with them. It's literally like you're coming up. It looks like a For Dummies book. It has the outline like it's a For Dummies book, right? And all of that. And so you work with them. You've got to write it. They'll assign some people that will help it be in the right, the same matter that a reader of a For Dummies book would recognize. And so we created a number of them, and our customers loved them. And the security expert that sort of helped us to put it together, like I remember him at trade shows, because we made sure his name was on them as well. Like he was signing them like he was some big time author at trade shows. Actually pretty humorous, to be honest. But like people really loved those books. And And we used to get a ton of leads from those For Dummies books.
Interesting. Wow. So you'd actually get people contacting you saying that they'd checked out your book.
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, there were thousands upon thousands that were downloaded from around the globe, and still to this day, the company that bought us, I looked at their website last week, and they still, 4 years after over 4 years after we did our original For Dummies book, and we did several, they still have one on the homepage. So it's still producing many years later.
Yeah, it's interesting because, a lot of brands would maybe think, oh, that could water down our message or water down our credibility. We're trying to be serious. We're trying to be professional here. And yet that doesn't seem like that was the case at all.
Yeah, no, people love those books. And really what I found is they're not for dummies at all. Like there's a lot of really good content. They're just kind of written in a certain style. But then we paired it with what we call the expert's guide, right? So, hey, you want to go to the next level and get the next level of info? Here you go, right? And so again, it's just more ways to capture leads. And for me, I knew that if I was growing website traffic month in, month out, which we were, and I was getting 5% of those visitors at least to convert and become a lead, that my content was world class. And think about what that means. What it means is that people are doing like what you and I probably almost never do, which is online giving your name, email, address, phone number, right? It's like you got to want something really bad to give up that info, right? And if your content is great, that will be one metric you could look at that will reveal that it is in fact great.
That's a good sign. High velocity digital marketing, Silicon Valley secrets to create breakthrough revenue in record time is the name of the new book, inspired, I imagine, in part from the acquisition. Talk a little bit about what inspired you to write the book.
So I read a McKinsey study that said 83% of CEOs expect their marketing to drive most of their company's revenue growth. And then I read Harvard Business Review study that said roughly 80% of the CEOs are not satisfied with the return on their marketing investments. And so if you talk to a lot of sales and marketing leaders, they feel overwhelmed by revenue expectations they can't meet. And part of the reason for that is that the way people buy now has totally changed. And to really understand this, think about it in your own lives. If you're going to go buy a car, you probably are not going to go to 10 different dealerships because you're looking forward to talking with 10 different sales representatives at those dealerships. Nothing against the sales reps.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Right. But what you're doing is people now rely on digital content to make purchase decisions. So if you're going to go buy that car, you're going to go to Google, you're going to start researching the cars, you're going to read reviews, you might go to sites and build those cars so that it's exactly the way you want them. Then you're going to research how much they should cost. So before you ever even walk into a dealer, you probably know more than the sales reps.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's just sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm buying our furnace broke about a month ago. And so I'm buying a new HVAC system now. And I met with one this morning. Compared to the first one I met with a month ago, night and day difference. Because a month ago, I had no idea it had just broken, wasn't sure what to do. And then in the last month, I have educated myself. I've read so many reviews, watched YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff. The guy who showed up this morning, I was like, this is what I want. These are the different things. It was like, is really kind of the modern buyer compared to the old way of buying.
67% of buyers prefer not to interact with sales reps as their primary source of info. And so when you think about how people are buying today, that like their marketing just hasn't evolved to capitalize on that shift and to do so in a way in which you're accelerating revenue. And what this means with all of this information that's available to buyers is that there's almost like this information parity during the buying process. It's changed the way marketers need to interact with potential buyers to influence them towards their products and services. So high velocity digital marketing is really all about teaching you how to become great online to consistently grow revenue. And it's very much written not in a theoretical way, right? I'm a startup guy, so like I don't have time to read a bunch of theory and prefer not to, right? I want how to, like, what could I learn and like implement today to affect revenue, right? And so that's sort of the style in which the book was written as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of start with what we were talking about here. First, laser focusing on your target audience, building the content, getting into mastering Google, creating a high-performing website. We haven't talked about that yet. Any other tips around the website that or changes that you made? I mean, we talked about it, actually, I guess, to a certain extent, but any other ideas around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a website perspective, I mean, certainly, I think we talked about content is really key, but also being great on Google is key, right? And so if you think about it, I mean, just as in the case of your purchase or soon to purchase, right? You Google, right? And so a lot of organizations, they struggle with being great on Google. And then there's books that are like 300 pages, or you talk to a SEO expert and your head's spinning with all the acronyms. And so here's something like listeners could start doing right now to start improving their results, right? And so we knew, because we talk with our customers, we used tools to figure out also what they're searching for, the phrases, the words, the number of those searches. We had a list of what we called coveted keywords and phrases that we always kept live, right? And so whenever we were creating new content, whether that be for the website or for some of the pieces of content that I was mentioning, we would always start that with the content creator and our SEO expert, who would review for that piece of content what would be the keywords that they ought to be using. And then at the end of that process, they would review, that SEO expert would review the content to make sure we weren't missing opportunities. Then we would make sure that every piece of content that we created was exposed to Google, and that scanning helped us to improve results. And then finally, our partners loved our content, so that helped us to create a ton of backlinks. Just by implementing that process, most organizations could put themselves in an entirely better spot to becoming great on Google.
So let me ask you, there must be someone at the door. I hear the dog in the background. But let me ask you, this is probably what some listeners might be thinking, well, how do you do that without your content sounding robotic by stuffing it with too many keywords?
And so that is very important, right? And so you always err on the side of readability, but you make sure that you get in the content as best you can, right? And so you would never ruin the reading experience based on the content, utilizing the words that you want to get in there. But I would always push it at what level can we get to and still have great content, right? So I would always want to be right on that edge. And then you might be saying, well, how do I know that I'm at that edge? Read it yourself. Like if it seems like it's forced, or that you're putting in words that like don't kind of fit, then you're going too far, right?
It really is. SEO really is an art and a science.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Steve, this has been great. We're almost out of time, so I want to wrap with the question I always ask, which is, I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who've helped you along the way. $5 billion in shareholder value. I imagine you've had a few people along the way that you would thank. especially peers, contemporaries, maybe some mentors too as well. Who would you want to, acknowledge publicly?
There are so many, but I'll pick one who I used to work for, but then also is a mentor. His name is Doug Irwin. He runs a venture capital company, and he really viewed startups, where I've spent my career, differently than most. He viewed startups and defined them as the last frontier for outlaws, a place where nonconformists could live, sell, and create their ideas. And, for me, who doesn't want to be that rough riding rebel running circles around the bureaucratic large organizations? And so he was tough, demanding, smart, but also treated his employees like family. And we exited a company called Pentasafe many years ago when he was the CEO, and still to this day, like 15, 16 years later, we still have huge attendance at annual reunion parties where all we could do is talk about what an awesome experience it was, and not how one single day ever felt like work. Doug was chiefly responsible for setting that tone, and I learned a lot from him.
That's great. This has been great, Steve. Such a great background explanation on how to create high velocity digital marketing. Where can people go to learn more about the book and learn more about you? Yeah,
High Velocity Digital Marketing is available wherever you would buy books online. And you can contact me at my website, which is beastartupsuperstar.com.
Love that URL. Steve, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.